A Belfast welcome for Antti Tuomainen and Jan Allen. And a very special guest to Stuart Neville, who has come from Portadown tonight. I'll explain what we're going to do tonight. I'm just going to introduce these three fine writers. We're going to have brief readings, and then we're just going to chat about crime fiction. And it is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to get I think, a different perspective on crime fiction, because I believe this is the very first time we have had crime writers from Helsinki and Stockholm in Belfast, so it is a very special night for me too. 16 years selling crime fiction in Belfast, and this is getting to the top, so thank you for coming.
Thank you.
If you speak into those, I think it should carry through okay. I'd like to introduce our first guest tonight, Antti Tuomainen, and you have to apologise for my pronunciation. If I get anything wrong, gentlemen, I am very sorry, but I shall do my best. Okay. Antti's first book, published in English, is called The Healer. It was published just last year, and from a personal perspective, I have to say it is one of the finest examples of dystopian crime fiction that I have ever come across. It is genre-breaking, it is very, very different in its style and in its narrative, and it relies primarily on atmosphere, characterization, and a sense of claustrophobia that I haven't come across in a very long time. So I would just like to ask Antti if he would read a small piece from the start of his book, or wherever he's going to read it from. I made an assumption, I'm sorry.
I'll read from the beginning. Chapter 1. Which was worse? Complete certainty that the worst had happened, or this fear building up moment by moment? Sudden collapse or slow crumbling disintegration? I lurched with the force of a swerve that shook me out of my wandering thoughts and looked up. Yellow-black flames from a wrecked truck lashed the pillar of the pedestrian bridge at the Sörnäinen shore road. The truck looked broken in two, embracing the pillar like a pleading lover. Not one of the passing cars slowed down, let alone stopped. They moved into the outside lane as they flew by, passing the burning wreck at the greatest possible distance. So did the bus I was sitting in. I opened my rain-drenched parka, found a packet of tissues in the inside pocket, pulled one loose with numb fingers, and dried my face and hair with it. The tissue was drenched through in a moment. I squeezed it into a ball and shoved it in my pocket. I shook drops of water from the hem of my jacket, then took my phone out of my pocket of my jeans. I tried to call Johanna again. The number was still unavailable. The metro tunnel was closed from Sörnäinen to Keilaniemi because of flooding. The train had taken me as far as Kalasatama, where I'd had to wait for the bus for 20 minutes under a sky filled with rain. The burning truck was left behind as I went back to watching the news on the screen attached to the back of the driver's bulletproof glass compartment. The southern regions of Spain and Italy had officially been left to their own devices. Bangladesh, sinking into the sea, had erupted in a plague that threatened to spread to the rest of Asia. The dispute between India and China over Himalayan water supplies was driving the two countries to war. Mexican drug cartels had responded to the closing of the US-Mexico border with missile strikes on Los Angeles and San Diego. The forest fires in the Amazon had not been extinguished even by blasting new river channels to surround the blaze. Ongoing wars or armed conflicts in the European Union, 13, mostly in border areas. Estimated number of climate refugees planet-wide, 650 to 800 million people. Pandemic warnings, H3N3, malaria, tuberculosis, Ebola, plague. Light piece at the end. The recently chosen Miss Finland believed that everything would be much better in the spring.
It doesn't get better. I would now like to move on to our second guest from Scandinavia, Jan Arnold, though I think a lot of us here would probably be more familiar with the name Arne Dahl, in particular with regards to the recent BBC4 television series featuring Group A police unit. I think for tonight's purposes, to avoid any sense of schizophrenia, I'm going to refer to you as Jan.
It's too late anyway.
Okay. Jan has been writing novels since the late 90s. The Blinded Man was originally entitled Mysterioso, after a very, very fine and influential piece of music that formed a major part of the plot structure of the book. But you have not only written Group A novels, you've written 11 of those.
Yeah.
But you've also written another series called Opkop. You started this in the early 2000s?
A little later, actually, 2010.
2010, a lot later, sorry. And how many of those novels have you in that series at the moment?
It's 2 out of 4.
It's 2 out of 4.
Yeah. I was going to write 10 books in the A group series, but I failed miserably. I wrote 11.
You wrote 11. Well, I think that's a positive failure. And I think the good news for us is that Antti, you're at the start of your career. We are hoping that there's going to be more work, more novels to read in English. But Arne, Jan, we have lots more to look forward to that are already published in Swedish and are going to be translated into English.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm sort of born again.
Excellent.
Young again.
Young again. Young again. Well, I would like to ask you if you would like to read something from The Blinded Man. Thank you.
Yes, it's not the absolute beginning, but it's the first time we really meet the killer. He is sitting motionless in the darkness, which isn't truly dark. Through the balcony door, light is seeping in from the street lights below the luxury apartment. If he turned his head, he would see both of the big museum buildings resting quietly in the faint light issuing from inside. But he doesn't turn his head. The silence is absolute. His gaze is directed unwaveringly across the floor of the large living room towards the half-open double doors leading to the hallway. He has already surveyed the space, a tiled stove and a fireplace in the same room. Next to the fireplace, a dull black big screen TV and the stacked units of a VCR and stereo. On the floor are 3 artistically hand-woven raya rugs, a dining table with 2 place settings and a 5-piece oxblood leather sofa group. A total of 7 tile stoves on both floors of the apartment. If the previous living room was ostentatious, this one is thoroughly stylish. He sits in the same position for over an hour. Then he hears the front door open. There's a fumbling with keys. He knows that the man is alone. The man swears softly out in the hallway, a noticeable but not extreme intoxication. More like the inebriation of a man who knows exactly where to find the point of greatest possible enjoyment and how to keep himself there all evening. He hears the man takes off his shoes and methodically put on his slippers. He even thinks he can hear how the man unknots his tie so that it hangs loose, draped down the front of his silk shirt. The man unbuttons his jacket. The man pulls open one side of the double doors, already ajar, and almost 10 feet tall. He enters the living room, stumbles out of one slipper, swears, bends down and manages to put it back on, then straightens up again and catches sight of him through the pleasurable haze. He tries to get a fix on him. "What in holy purple perdition," says the man pompously. Famous last words. He raises the gun from his lap and fires 2 rapid, silent shots. The man stands still for a moment, stock still. Then he sinks to his knees and leans forward. He stays there for 10 seconds, then topples over sideways. He places the gun on the glass table and takes a deep breath. In his mind he sees a list. Mentally, he ticks off a name.
Our third author tonight is I think, I'm making an assumption here, well known to friends of No Alibis. Stuart has been an ardent supporter of the shop and has graced the shop itself many times to launch his books. Stuart's career started with The 12, which won the Los Angeles Times Book of the Year award in the thriller category, followed by Collusion and Lost Souls. All 3 of these books dealt with contemporary post-conflict Northern Ireland in various forms and in varying ways. But Stuart's most recent novel, Ratlines, is a delving into the historical past of Ireland and in relation to post-war Germany as well. A very, very different book, very, very different setting. And Stuart's going to briefly read from Ratlines for us tonight. Thank you.
Before I do that, just to say how much I admire our friends here for being able to read at all in a second language. I can't read a menu if it's not in English, so I'm very, very impressed with them. I'm just going to very quickly set up what I'm going to read here. It's Albert Ryan from the Directorate of Intelligence has been tasked with tracking down some killers who are stalking Otto Skorzeny, the notorious Nazi who lived in Kildare outside Dublin during the 60s. And he knows they have an informant, and he believes he has tracked that informant down to a college overlooking Swords Estuary outside Dublin. So that's where it's going to pick up. But they start by discussing the term dweller on the threshold, which I had originally wanted to be the title of this novel. And I very passionately wanted this book to be called Dweller on the Threshold, but both my UK and my American publishers had their doubts. The UK publisher kept hearing from my editor, Jeff, saying, "Are you sure? Are you sure? You want something a bit snappier?" But it was when my American editor, Juliet, emailed me and said, "When you think of the real title, you'll let us know, won't you?" That kind of decided it, so Ratlines it was. Anyway. "Tell me," Catherine Beauchamp said, "do you know the term dweller on the threshold?" Ryan shook his head. "No, I don't." It's a spiritualist idea, or occultist, depending on your point of view. It has different meanings to different people. Some consider the dweller a malevolent spirit that attaches itself to a living person. Others describe it as a past evil, a dark reflection of oneself from a former life. We all have this thing, something that hides in our shadow, something that shames us. She studied the swirling blue patterns of the smoke that hung between them. "I don't understand," Ryan said. "What I did during the war," she said, "the people I allowed to attach themselves to me, the things I wrote, what I allowed myself to be in that life, all these, they're my dweller on the threshold." "You mean guilt?" "Perhaps," she said. "If I had known the truth of it, the Germans who promised us so much, if I had known what they were doing to those people, the Jews, the Roma, the homosexuals, I would have made a different choice." Do you believe me? Ryan did not answer the question. Instead, he asked, do you resent Otto Skorzeny? In what way? Any way. She laughed. I resent that he's grown rich and fat. I resent that his love of money and power has drowned the love of his country. I resent that he allows himself to be a show pony for the Irish bourgeoisie. Are those enough ways? Ryan leaned forward, his forearms on the table. Pages of poetry rustled beneath his elbows. Has anyone ever come to you and asked about Colonel Skorzeny or any of the other people like you? She tried to hide it, but there it was, a flicker. Then it was gone. People like me? Foreign nationals, he said. Refugees from Europe. You mean Nazis? She said. Collaborators? Yes. She stubbed out the cigarette. Glowing tobacco embers floated up from the ashtray. Why do you ask me this? Whoever's been targeting Skorzeny's associates, your friends. My friends, they're not mine. Whatever they are to you, a well-trained and organised team of killers has been targeting them. And they have an informant. Someone with access to Skorzeny's circle. Someone who has reason to turn against their friends. Someone like you. She shook her head, her eyes distant. This is nonsense. Where do you get this idea? Nonsense. Ryan kept a silence, watched her as she turned her gaze to the window, overlooking a garden. He counted the seconds until she said, I would like you to leave now. Listen to me, Ryan said. If you betrayed Colonel Skorzeny, your only hope is to tell me now. If you pass on information to others, tell me who they are and what you told them. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened again. I didn't. Not me. Ryan reached for her, touched her forearm, and she recoiled. You know what Skorzeny will do to you. Talk to me and I'll protect you. She shook her head and smiled. Oh, you are a child, aren't you? All my life I will. Paper scattered as she slapped the tabletop with her palm. If Otto Skorzeny desires a man's death, or a woman's, then death will come. Don't you know this? He plucked Mussolini from a mountaintop. He fucked a Vita under Perron's nose. Then he rubbed the fascist bastard blind and was thanked for it. This is his power. Not an office, not a title. No law will stop him. Beauchamp stood, went to the sink, and gripped its edge. Ryan got to his feet. Please, you know the alternative. You know what Skorzeny will do to you if he gets to you first. Either you talk to me or you... Her hand dipped behind the gingham curtain that hung below the sink. She turned, a small semi-automatic pistol aimed at Ryan's chest. Her hand quivered, the pistol jittering in her grasp. The other hand gripped the slide assembly and pulled it back. Ryan raised his hands as high as his shoulders. Does he know about me? She asked. I didn't give him your name, Ryan said, but he knows there's an informant. I found you without any trouble. He can do the same. And he will. Please, let me protect you. Tears sprung from Beauchamp's wide eyes, heavy, darkening her blouse where they fell from her cheeks. Her breathing quickened with fear, her chest heaving. She wiped at her cheeks, sniffed hard. They told me I'd be safe. They promised me. It was my penance. I told them what they wanted to know so God would forgive me. Has God forgiven me? I don't know. Who were they? They showed me photographs. The children. Her free hand went to her belly, clutched at the flesh over her womb. The dead children, the bones, their dead eyes, their mouths open, flies on their lips. You didn't do that to them, Ryan said. He stepped around the table. Like you said, you didn't know. Please, put the gun down. Will God forgive me? I don't know. Catherine, please, put the gun down. Talk to me. We can work something out. You can run and get out of the country. She asked again, her voice firm and final. Will God forgive me? Ryan lowered his hands. Yes, he will. Catherine Beauchamp smiled. She opened her mouth wide, brought the pistol up, put the muzzle between her teeth, and closed her eyes. Ryan said no, but it was done before he could take a single step.
sitting here and looking across at the books, it became apparent to me, almost by accident, that we have 3 novels by 3 authors written within the genre of crime fiction. But they all cover very different aspects. We have a novel ostensibly of the past, a series of novels set in the very contemporary world that we live in now, and a novel of a dystopian future. But they all maintain the same characteristics of the genre. And I'm going to sort of quote from you, Jan, here. You mentioned, the crime novel is the perfect tool to reach into the contemporary human mind and society. It helps to raise a moral question that continues to resonate throughout the work.
Yeah, well put.
It's nice that you like it.
Yeah. I love these modest folks. Well, I mean, you're going to say yes, I know that. How relevant do you think that description of the genre is of the crime novel, with regards to your work, and Stuart, with regards to yours? Do you see the crime novel as a tool to open up society and the moral and social issues that lie in there?
Definitely. Crime novel as a, well, first of all, as a dramatic form, it's quite perfect for putting people in extreme situations. So these extreme situations might be something that is happening in society or in their lives, or both. So yes, it is a perfect vehicle for that.
Arne, you still hold true to those words that you said?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like Antti said here, it's always about the extreme conditions. It's about life and death, and it's always about the fundamental questions of what is it to take another person's life, and really, really tough questions, and you get them sort of for free if you use the crime genre. Then you can do it better or worse, of course, but the preconditions are there for doing deep digging, if you like, both into a society and into the mind of killers and normal people. I would like to make that distinction. Yeah.
Well, I think what reflects in the best the best depiction of crime fiction within those criteria is the fact that it's not always the perceived bad people who do the things that are morally suspect. In the sort of the journey to find some sort of moral or judicial certitude that the good people, the so-called honourable people, can be as violent and as dangerous and as compromised as the so-called criminal.
It's only interesting if there is a difference somehow between the personal moral and the judicial system. Then it becomes interesting. When you just nail a bad guy, then you only work with the judicial system. He's breaking the law. He needs to be taken off the streets. It's a one-dimensional or two-dimensional way of handling it. If you really need those two different systems, and they need to clash a little bit.
That certainly has been the case with your work, Stuart. The moral ambiguity of be they bad men who are suffering from their guilt, or supposed good men who are equally guilty of things that they have done wrong in the process of trying to carry out justice. How important do you feel that is in the sort of in not making your novels black and white, because none of the work here is black and white?
I don't think it's something I purposely pursue, but simply because it's something I enjoy reading. That naturally comes out in my writing. I mean, I don't particularly enjoy sort of black hat, white hat sort of takes on law and order and justice and life in general. There's a big influence from James Ellroy, say, of his cop characters, who are often every bit as venal and corrupt as the people they're pursuing. And he writes, the sort of lesson I learned from reading him was that he doesn't judge his characters. Every character behaves as they will in their world. And even the most villainous character is the hero of their own personal story. So if you approach the fiction of not imposing your own moral code on your characters, but letting them do as they would in their world, the ambiguity naturally comes into it. But I'm going to borrow a quote that our mutual friend John Connolly uses, but I'm not sure where he stole it from. But it was that you know, in the next life we have justice, and in this life we have the law, and those are two very, very different concepts. And part of what crime fiction does, I think, for readers is join the two in a way that doesn't happen often in real life. And it's one of the few places we really see justice played out, is on the page. And I don't think most rational people would particularly want the kind of justice we see in our crime novels really played out on the streets, otherwise it'd be an awful lot of dead criminals about.
Well, maybe some people do want that, unfortunately.
possibly, but I think it's a little bit of wish fulfillment. It allows us to maybe soothe some of the fears we have about the imbalances and the injustices in the world.
Well, that for time immemorial, that's why people have read crime fiction, and crime fiction has, in many respects, developed to encompass the idea that society is not black and white. Society is very grey. Society is a mixture and a melding of different things. You know, the idea of having moral certitude as the end result, and justice is received, that very rarely happens now in the best of detective fiction, because that just comes down as a pat response. Jan, you had mentioned the sort of the dilemma between the judicial system and the criminal act. In your contemporary novels, there is a judicial system. In Stuart's work, there is a judicial system. I'd like to move to Antti's book, The Healer, because we are in a time when the whole concept of a judicial system is very, very tenuous. We have a novel that is set believably in a future time. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the background of The Healer?
I'll try to be just, you know.
Oh, we had a discussion earlier on, and the key thing is you don't give anything away. So don't worry, we're not going to give anything away.
Well, first of all, I'd like to add what Stuart and Arne said just a moment ago. I'd like to add that, you know, I think good crime fiction is always somehow about the truth. Not necessarily what's right or wrong, or what's a just punishment or anything like that. But I think, you know, even in the crime novels that I admire most I think the main theme is truth. The characters are seeking a truth about something, or some even a mythological truth. This might sound a bit highbrow, but I just feel that, you know, in every good crime novel, it is more than the actual happenings and the actual punishments or just justice done or anything like that. But about The Healer, it's a crime story and it's a love story. It started a couple of years ago, actually quite a few years ago, I started getting interested in this phenomenon called climate change. I've read a lot about it, and I got this feeling from all these reports and books that it was very scientific, and it portrayed a world where everything is predictable. So I wanted to dramatize it, if for no one else, for me. And that's the background for the story, and it's of course, a very dystopic setting. And to make that dystopic setting somehow something that I would care about, I would have to add something to it. That's why there's this love story. That's why there's this very classic setting of a man starting a search for his missing wife, and going through their life together, and learning new things about his wife, and even some things that, were left unsaid. I'll put it that way.
Because you mentioned, when people have come and asked me about the book, and I mentioned this sense of a futuristic setting, and they automatically turn around to me and say, "Is it science fiction?"
No, it's not.
No. Oh, actually, this is the point. It most certainly is not, because whilst you mention this dystopia, it could be 5 years in the future, it could be 15 years in the future, it could be 6 months in the future, we don't know. The fact is that it's believable in its turmoil and its trauma, because you bring everyday events into the narrative. Okay, there are terrible things that have happened, they're obvious, they're apparent, but people still try and maintain their sense of everyday life. And this search for a missing loved one is part of that everyday life. I think the narrative and the way in which it's written, I was thinking about this, and I think I could describe it as a crime haiku.
Thank you.
Because it's not always clear and apparent, and that's why it is so very, very different. And it's definitely not science fiction, folks. I just want to make that clear to you.
Thank you, David.
No. Jan, I'm trying really hard not to call you Arne. I'm sorry, and it's working. Jan.
I think you maybe should call me Arne.
Okay.
No.
When you started writing in the late 90s, did you see yourself, and I've always wanted to ask this to a Swedish or Scandinavian author, did you see yourself writing within the shadow of Sjöwall and Malou, or in the shadow of McConnell, or anyone like that? Or did you just think, I want to write crime fiction as I see it?
Well, the basic thing is, yes, I wanted to write crime fiction, but there was a very good and in a way usable Swedish tradition of crime fiction, and it had a slightly special angle with a social criticism sort of naturally baked into it, and the possibility to dig deep down into the contemporary society. But of course I didn't want to just repeat what they did, because both of those were rather important influences for me. Sjöwall, which is of course impossible to pronunciate in English.
I got it wrong.
No, it was good. Yeah. They sort of brought the police procedural, the realistic, if you like, police procedural into Sweden via Ed McBain, really, from America. And it immediately took the form of a criticism against the welfare state gone wrong. And you have this idea, I don't know how alive that idea is in these parts of the world, but there is this general idea from abroad that Sweden has a better welfare state than most other countries, and so on.
Well, and this is the point. I think this is the thing that Showa and Malu did. That they, and I know when I started reading them, and they were first published here in the 80s, 70s and 80s, it was like a slap in the face, because we had been told that Sweden was the social utopia of the world, and all of a sudden you're reading these procedural crime novels that, even by today's standards, are graphic in their depiction of social injustice and poverty and inequality that we just didn't expect.
No, and it is interesting that it sort of starts with this illusion, perhaps, of the perfect welfare state. When crime fiction starts for real in Sweden, when you see the cracks in this illusionary image of Sweden as the best country in the world. It's not. But then this, it sort of went down a little bit after the 70s, because this was a radical literature. It was sort of even became revolutionary in a way at the end. And that whole spirit disappeared during the 70s, and in the 80s came instead neoliberalism and the free market ideas. The Thatcherism turned into Swedish.
Which, of course, solves everything.
Yeah, if you like, yeah. But then we had another incident, and that was the killing of our Prime Minister, Olof Palme, in 1986, which sort of revitalized the crime fiction genre in a way, because it's the single shot that killed our Prime Minister was also killing the whole idea of, was killing our innocence, if you like. So we sort of, and 5 years later, Henning Mankell's first book came with a rather harsh social criticism as well. And somewhere in the next generation, that's me then, trying to do something a little bit different, but still with the feet firmly in the soil of Sjöwall and Henning Mankell.
Because I get the feeling, and we're going to talk about this because it's impossible not to talk about the television adaptations that have just recently started to air, that they are procedurals that have a very American feel to them, in terms of the use of technology and the use of force and the use of the preparedness to be forceful and aggressive, which you wouldn't necessarily have seen to the same degree in the Martin Beck novels to that extent. Do you think that was a reflection then of Sweden losing its innocence, and that is reflected in the way then that you write your crime fiction?
I would almost say yes. Instantly, yeah, I think it is. I mean, it is not so usual to use, after all, police as real heroes. They tend to be bent or corrupt in different ways. But in Sweden, we have sort of used police officers that are not bad and not corrupt, and that's probably has some nostalgia to it, that we still dream of the police officers actually being good. Some remnants of that idea anyway. But then of course they are also in the grey zone, behaving slightly. Yeah, the end justifies the means and so on, yeah.
As a writer from this part of the world, Stuart, tackling issues from our recent past, it's impossible not to tread on dangerous areas, areas that are going to raise issues that you're going to be quizzed about and things of that nature. When you sat down to write the first 3 novels, which are so very political but at the same time apolitical in a way, because you're trying to break that cliched mould, did you sort of sit down and have to take a deep breath before you started on the path that you were going to sort of look through?
Well, so many times before, the 12 slash The Ghost of Belfast, its American title, was actually the 3rd novel that I'd written. I'd written 2 novels previously, one set in Florida, which I've still never been to, and the second one set in Manchester, where at least I had lived there at one time. And all the time I was trying to write, the one place I did not want to write about was Northern Ireland. The one topic I did not want to write about was the Troubles, post or pre or any other variation on it. But it just so happened the short story that went on to form the first chapter of the 12 presented itself, and I couldn't avoid it. But the problem is when you write about Northern Ireland, in particular if you write about crime in Northern Ireland, you cannot avoid the politics of paramilitarism and the politics of policing. Because thankfully I think it is changing, albeit slowly, but everything in Northern Ireland is political. Sport's political, education's political, the school you go to is political, the bar you go to is political. You know, everything's one thing or the other thing. Everything has a side, whether you want to take a side or not. Our peculiar little society is formed around this sort of two-sided coin that is where we live. So if you tackle almost any subject that's set in Northern Ireland, you're going to get into politics. You just can't avoid it. So it's not that I deliberately pursue those more difficult kind of subjects. They're just unavoidable. They're there. You can't. It's like stumbling over roots in a forest. They're just there. You can't avoid them.
So in that way, was it a relief to write Ratlines? That's what I was wanting to really get to. Was it a sort of a freeing up of those concerns?
It was freeing in many respects, and like in practical respects. Being free of mobile phones in the plot was nice. It was always nice to free myself because the character of Albert Ryan he's a member of the G2, Director of Intelligence, which is a real organisation. It's the Irish Secret Service, but very, very little is known about them. So I'm actually free to make stuff up. Instead of having to sort of fact check things, it gives you a certain amount of leeway just to work outside sort of procedural kind of writing, which was nice as well. Though oddly, I mean, in terms of delicate subjects, I've had probably more angry emails off the back of this book than any of the previous 3.
Why? Why is that?
I think some people refuse to believe the factual basis behind it. I also bizarrely discovered people really don't like some people don't like Otto Skorzeny being portrayed negatively. Because he built a fiction around himself, this kind of daring, swashbuckling kind of figure, which was all bunk. I mean, he was his own propaganda machine. But because some World War II historians or history buffs are really bought into that image, they really don't like the idea of him being portrayed negatively. And I also get emails that I had one message that was actually left very recently that I read on somebody else's review of the book that actually didn't like the portrayal of Nazis in a negative manner. Which, I think that's the thing that shocked me a little bit with this book, that some people actually don't like Nazis. They kind of feel like Nazis have got a bad deal. And that's really surprised me.
Stuart, you really know how to step in it all the time. You know, you would have thought it was bad enough in this place, but now you're broadening your remit here. Well done, congratulations. I want to ask Jan another question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. Televisual representations of work.
How does it make you feel?
Primarily proud, I think. It's some kind of reception that's nice. It's an honor, if you like. The fact that they want to spend these millions on the books is fantastic in itself. I mean, that's the childish reaction, and you feel, yes, of course, it's the crown on my head. And I was sort of involved in choosing characters. That's the casting process. I was also involved in. Yeah,
that's very unusual. Normally, you know.
Yeah, you can either you're part of it really. That's the normal. Either you're part of it really and write scripts or takes part in script writing, or you sort of just sell it off and leave the place as fast as possible. I was somewhere in between. I didn't want to write the script. I want to write new stories. I can't go back and write my old stories once again. That would be horribly boring. But somebody else did it, and I sort of looked at the scripts all the time. But when they came to script 14C or something like that for The Blinded Man, I felt maybe I shouldn't do this full time without pay. So I sort of, for a moment there, I lost touch with the thing, and then I thought, anything can happen now. This could be a real horror show. But it turned out to be good. There are some things missing from the books, of course. Still, it is 2 times 90 minutes for a book, which is good. I mean, it's 3 hours. And it means a lot from the books can really be a part of it. So I'm happy with the result, even if it has this slight touch of a light version. But it's okay. It's okay.
I don't know if many of you have seen the TV series, so I'm going to be careful. I'm not going to give anything away. But of course, there are always characters that you see, and they resonate automatically. And it's impossible not to have the character of Nyberg resonate automatically, be it on a physical sense, be it on that sort of that silent, strong type. There is an interesting story. I was asking about this, who the actor was, and you told me something quite interesting about him.
Yeah, the point with the whole team idea is that there is no real super protagonist, no main person. It's a team and it's a collective in a way. We managed to get good actors in all of the parts, but it was a bit problematic because I've written from the beginning that Gunnar Nyberg is going to be the biggest police officer in Sweden. Of course, they were a bit nervous at the film company. They saw that, so they tried to get all the big Swedish actors in a room together and picking one. But it didn't really work. He needed to be even bigger. And then somebody, and I don't know who, got the brilliant idea to use the strongest man in the world. Magnus Samuelsson, he's called. He's known for carrying cars and lifting big rocks these days. Retired though, and they thought, yeah, why not give it a go? And I saw a casting film with him, and it's when he calls, I don't know if you've seen, he calls his daughter for the first time in 15 years, and she's a grown woman now. And he was fantastic, and I thought, yeah, this will work. He will make this transformation in a good way.
I think you've been responsible for a new career for him, actually.
Yeah.
What I find amazing in the show, and of course it's a reflection on what Stuart was saying, is that the show, certainly the last show, it's positively bilingual. And that is unusual, I think. It's great that BBC4 concentrates on television series from around the world, different crime series from Italy, from France, from Scandinavia. But this is one where it is actively a bilingual show. And of course that's not for the benefit of the BBC, that's going to happen anyway.
Yeah, and it's also a little bit has to do with the fact that this team in the Swedish police is working with international crimes in different ways. So it's natural that they always encounter foreign languages and foreign policies. And this, in Bad Blood, the latest, it's American.
Folks, I'm going to open it up to you. If anybody would like to ask any questions of our authors, don't be shy.
What's wrong with science fiction?
That's a good question.
Absolutely nothing. However, my book it's not science fiction. It's set in the city it's set in Helsinki, capital of Finland. It's very much the city of today, only slightly altered. It's a dystopic version of that city. So I wanted to make it very real, very realistic. Realistic is the word I'm looking for. Very realistic. So we're not talking some of the common elements in science fiction where you move actually to another reality in a way. So that's why I was being very, very direct about but nothing's wrong with science fiction, of course.
Gentleman here, thank you.
I'd just like to ask, why do you think Scandinavian noir has become so popular, not just in the United Kingdom, but across Europe and many parts of the world over the last 10 years or so?
Maybe it is. Everybody heard the question? Yeah, it's Scandinavian. Yeah, it remains a bit difficult to answer. I mean, if you count the Finnish literature to the Scandinavian, which is a definition question, but you probably should. Yeah.
Feel free for the sake of the answer.
But in general, I think in real geography, it's just Sweden and Norway that are the Scandinavian peninsula. But we usually count Finland, Iceland, and Denmark as well. So, and altogether, these have been very successful. They've been successful in Germany for a long time, for example. But it took a long time to get into the Anglo-American world. Partly, of course, because you have so much good crime fiction yourselves. Germany doesn't.
They're taping this, Arne.
Well, there's such a, let's put it like this. There's such an abundance of fantastic English, Irish, Scottish, American crime fiction that you really never had to leave the country. But I guess somewhere along the line it would be interesting even for you as sort of the origin of crime fiction to see what happened with this so Anglified or Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American genre when it's slightly differently lit, if you like. Because we, as I said sometime, we're not writing Mongolian crime fiction. It's pretty close, but it's because it's pretty close, the differences can perhaps be obvious, and I guess you just tapped into a long ongoing genre of Swedish crime fiction that's been invisible before. Yeah.
Just before we go to another question, I want to jump to the defence of a German crime writer.
Yeah, we had this discussion before.
But this is going to make them feel good and look good as well, don't worry. But there is a certain irony that one of the finest, I think, contemporary German crime writers, a man called Jan Costin Wagner,
Yes.
actually writes about Finland and sets his work in Finland. But ostensibly he is a German crime writer.
Yes, and I know him and I love his books, so I sort of regret now.
Does Irish crime fiction have anything within it that you think isn't in Scandinavian crime fiction, in terms of characterization, in terms of plot?
What's a difficult question? I mean, we've got these sort of similarities of being cold places where people drink a lot. So you think there's a lot of common ground there. I mean, it's a question, since I was first published, it's a question that kept coming up, is when is Irish crime fiction going to be the new Scandinavian crime fiction? It's like we've been sort of, ever the bridesmaid for this last few years. I don't know, I mean, I find it hard to pin down what it is specifically about Scandinavian crime fiction that makes it stand apart, other than the location, because if it was purely having a exotic location, then surely Irish crime fiction would have wider appeal, and surely would be reading Italian crime fiction and Spanish crime fiction and Nigerian crime fiction, whatever, but it's...
Does it maybe draw a different mythology?
I can't answer from the Scandinavian viewpoint. I know from the Irish crime fiction point of view, I think pretty much all of the Irish crime writers will tell you they look to America for their influences, first and foremost. I mean, I always prattle on about James Ellroy. I know other writers will go a bit further back to Hammett and Chandler and so on. So it may be that Irish culture in general has been Americanized to a great extent, and the fiction reflects that. I don't know if Scandinavian culture has been similarly homogenized by those outside influences, and maybe it has retained a bit more of a
That might
identity.
be. That might be.
Yeah. And it's also, to a certain extent, the crime fiction genre is also, to a certain extent, a reaction against the Americanization of the culture, perhaps. So it has a certain nostalgic touch when you want to defend the old social democratic system against the hyper-capitalism of America. So maybe there is something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And about mythology, I mean, I love to find traces of crime fiction far, far back in history. I love, for example, this is a little embarrassing, but I like the old Greek tragedies, for example, a fantastic crime story, King Oedipus. But there is also a certain Scandinavian version of it in the Icelandic sagas, and we have read a lot of them. I have anyway, where there is a slightly different morals. It's about reputation to a very large extent. Because when you die, you instantly go to Valhalla anyway. So it really doesn't matter. But it's what you leave behind. It's the word that you leave after you. Maybe there is something there, a little difficult.
But is there perhaps maybe a seriousness of mind in Scandinavian crime fiction as well? Whereas, again, because maybe in our more American influences, are kind of occasionally maybe a little bit of a flippancy to English language crime fiction, sort of the wise-ass kind of characters. I don't particularly tend to write those, but they do exist, they're quite common.
Yeah.
Whereas my perception, I could be mistaken, of Scandinavian crime fiction is it's a little bit more straight-faced.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
I don't know if that is part of the appeal or.
Maybe yeah.
Maybe it's the long winter nights.
Yeah.
Could be that.
Yeah.
You both read out your excerpts in English, and I just would like to know, how do you feel, in how far are your books the same books in English translation, and how far has what you want to say changed in translation?
It's a good question. Translations are sometimes tricky. I'm very happy with the translation of The Healer. I think Lola Rogers did a fantastic job, actually. But it certainly changes. It certainly changes because English it's a very different. This will sound silly, but it's a different language from Finland. Finnish. It's in a way different story. It feels different, but of course I'm a writer and it's my own book, so I might be prejudiced there.
Yeah, of course. I think my books have been translated into 25 languages, which is a lot. And sometimes you get the book home in the mailbox and you look at it and you kind of recognize your own name, but no more. And you have no idea what book it is, and it's very strange. Then you have no control whatsoever. But in English, after all, we speak good enough and read good enough English to make some judgment about the nature of the translation. And that's why I think I work very closely with my translator as well, and I'm very happy.
On a related note, Stuart, your books have been translated into lots of different languages. Have you ever had an issue where a translator has contacted you to check that the interpretation or the nuance that they're carrying through is correct? Because certainly with regards to the first 3 books that are Belfast-based, Northern Irish-based, there are colloquialisms, there's vernacular. Has anyone contacted you about that?
I've had contacts, indirect questions from some translators. The one I've dealt with most is a lady called Fabienne Dovino, who translates the French books, and she comes back with very searching questions, not so much about colloquialisms, but about the intention, if I've used metaphors or things that aren't quite literal expressions. She wants to know what I was getting at, and so I work quite closely with her, and I think it's not a coincidence that the French edition has won several awards. Nothing to do with me, it's because the translator has done such a good job.
Too modest.
No. But it's simply because she has. The way I look at it is the translator. If it's done right, it's not just a matter of literally sort of transposing from one language to another. They're writing a new novel in their language, using yours as a template, which I think is what she's done, and she's been successful at, and that's why the book's have done well and gotten the awards and so on. The other example, I mean, I don't think of any reason why I can't say this publicly, is the Spanish translation, for example, was maybe less successful in that there's one particular scene in the 12 where Jerry Fagan's sort of held up against the wall by another character, and he's going, "You're the boy," as in, we know the expression as "you're the man, you're the head honcho, you're the guy." It's a sort of a compliment. But the literal Spanish translation, "You are the young male child." You know, you kind of think, yeah, it doesn't quite work. You know.
It sort of kills the moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's a little bit frustrating because all it would have taken was a couple of emails and to make that work better. So I don't know what the processes are in foreign publishers. So you know, I would have thought it would logically, if you were a publisher, you'd want to get that book as good as it can be to get the most chances of succeeding in your market. So I'm surprised that I've had as little contact as I've had from some publishers. But it's gratifying when you do get the contact and you know that the care is being taken.
Maybe they were hoping to get into the teenage market. No, it's interesting you mentioned that thing about your French translator, because Lawrence Block, the amazing American crime writer, once said that the most persistent translator he ever had, looking for those nuances and those differences and those forms of language, was his French translator. And that, he said, that went a long way to ensuring that his books were such a success in France and that he is such a highly regarded author in France. The unfortunate thing was that the French translator would often forget in his enthusiasm what time it was in Paris as opposed to what time it was in New York. So he would regularly get phone calls very early in the morning. You know, he cursed him and blessed him at the same time. So, folks, we have been talking here for over an hour. I think we're going to take one more question, and then we will have an opportunity to go outside and you can chat to Antti, Jan and Stuart in more detail if you want. But does anyone have one last question?
Any televisual adaptations of Antti and Stuart's work in the pipeline?
Any television adaptations of Antti and Stuart's work?
I'm not supposed to comment on this.
We're not really recording.
There's been film interest in the book.
My first book, The 12, was optioned under its American title, Ghosts of Belfast. Not long after it came out, I think, actually, by Craig Ferguson, the Scottish comedian who went to America and made his fortune as a late-night talk show host. But it's Pierce Brosnan is attached to play Jerry Fagan. His son, Sean Brosnan, who is the spitting image of his father, is to play Fagan as a young man. Now, it's still, there are many hurdles between here and there of actually getting a film produced, so I'm not going to jump up and down just yet, but it has taken some big steps forward, so I'll keep my fingers crossed for that one.
Folks, this has been a scream. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much, Antti, Jan and Stuart, for being here tonight.